Welcome to another edition of the Premium Show. We're talking to the fund managers of ATR Asset Management, or ATA. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure to have you guys here.
Our pleasure.
First question, Phil. Given the higher than expected inflation that we've had over the past couple of months, and we see also several institutions, both local and international, do a downgrade on growth expectations for the Philippines. Is this something that you're worried about? Did any of our fundamentals change?
Well, I think right now, the quick answer is not yet. Not yet. I think you have to take it into the perspective of, first, what is our potential GDP growth rate and where were we? Right. And I think in the first quarter of this year, when we printed 6.8%, that was well above our potential GDP. Our potential GDP growth rate is somewhere around 6%. So I think we feel a GDP growth rate of 6%, maybe between 6 and 6.4%, is really where we should be, where the country, it's a growth rate that can be sustained. I think when you take yourself back maybe 10 years, our growth rates there were about 4.5%. And that was primarily driven by consumption. There was very little investment. And that consumption remains today. So I think you can say that 4.5% is already the base, right, with consumption. The higher investment programs that we've seen, and I think the proof, when you look at the real data, the real news, FDI has been growing 4 years in a row, if I'm not mistaken. Last year, hitting 10 billion pesos, and expected to surpass 10 billion pesos this year. The government is spending more than they ever have in their own infrastructure projects. Maybe not yet the big ticket items that we're all waiting for, but across the country, there's spending going on. So that's added the next sort of 1.5% to what I feel a 6% growth rate. As long as the government continues to invest and continues to spend, and our consumption remains what it is, healthy, then 6% should be achievable on a sustained basis for the long term. I think the challenge is the government was shooting for 7 or 8%. Basically, we feel that the absorptive capacity of the economy is not there yet to be able to achieve that 7 to 8% growth rate in a sustainable fashion, right? So should we be worried that it's only at 6 versus 6.8? My answer is no. Now, if it starts to drop way below that, sort of head back to the 4, 4.5, which tells us that either consumption is dropping or the government has stopped investing, then I think there's some concern. But I don't think that's in the cards today. I don't think that's in the plans. The government continues to spend, and they have a budget to do so. The revenues are higher than they have been before as far as tax collection, so there's no excuse not to spend. I think consumption in the second quarter, we saw discretionary consumption slow down, but that's a normal reaction to high prices. People just hold back a bit. I mean, prices are high.
The luxuries.
Yeah, the luxuries, but that's a big part still of the consumption factor, and I think it will be unleashed. It'll be unleashed when you start to see inflation normalize. Are we going to go back to 1% inflation? We shouldn't, because we're growing. But can we grow at 4 to 5% inflation? I think we can. So right now, that's our view, is that 6% growth is healthy growth, it's sustainable growth, it's higher than most of the world. And inflation needs to settle. And then, obviously, the peso, which is the sort of the guidepost for sentiment of the country, has lost significant ground. So the question we had is the big move done? Are we now going to be looking at a range of 54 to 56 or 52 to 54, which is when we saw periods of growth, when we were at 42, there was a range there for a couple of years, then it went up another couple of years at the 46 range, and then 48 range, except that 48 to 54 went very fast. No? So I think that put a bit of shock, that scared some foreign investors. But a lot of it, I think, is driven by sentiment. On top of course, the current account deficit imbalance, which will remain. I think that's something that we have to expect will be around for a few more years as we continue to build. No?
What I'm curious about, Phil, is what you mentioned, not yet.
Yeah. What would make me concerned?
What would make you concerned?
Yeah. So if inflation stays high and interest rates continue to go up, then think about capex of corps. Let's talk about a power company, for example. These power companies have had to hold off on constructing. We know that many plans have been put on hold. Some of these plans were put on the table 3 years ago. 3 years ago, the peso was at 46. Interest rates were very low. If the plans come back on the table today, you have to reassess, because now your interest rate is 8
Right.
and the peso is 53, and you have to import all of those goods. No? So there's going to be a pause because people have to rethink this. But will it? And so that's the scenario if things stay elevated for a long time. My sense is, I think, when you look at inflation as being the first issue to try and solve, nobody got it right. Honestly, nobody did. I don't know any analyst in town that said we were going to be at 6%. Many people thought you had the train effect on top of sort of the range of 2 to 4. So let's say that was going to bring it to 5. And then the oil effect, which again, nobody really forecasted 50% higher. That brought it maybe 1% more. I'm not sure the exact amount, but it certainly added to the inflation number. And then the rice issue, which we felt the government actually acted early, but for whatever reason, we seem to have shot ourselves in the foot on that one. And that added the third leg to the increase. What are we doing about it? Structural change. Rice tarification, it's not a Band-Aid solution. That is something that it's a law. It's a law that will be implemented, or is already implementable, but probably not going to be used until maybe next year, because we are in the middle of harvest season. So I don't think we'll see supply shocks in the short term. But for next year or the years moving forward, this is a structural change that will hopefully allow Philippine food inflation to be a lot less volatile, right? So that's very important that passes. I think as far as oil is concerned, there is some concern that it could spike again, but I think the average this year has been close to $70 already. So I don't think we'll see a 50% increase to that next year. And so the high base of the average for this year shouldn't, again, add too much inflation impact for next year. So, and then train 1, I think that was meant to be short term. I think when you look at when we passed VAT in 2004, it had an inflationary effect for 1 year, and then things settled down. So that's kind of the picture that we're trying to paint for next year, or maybe even into the fourth quarter and into next year, where, hey, we're growing at 6%, we're going to have inflation. You cannot not have it. But you can't have inflation higher than your growth rate, right? That's what we don't want. So I think, we're going to see things settle a little bit. And that's important, because that's going to change sentiment. And sentiment is what needs to change today. Because the fundamentals, we can talk about it all day long. They're pretty good. Nowhere near where we were in crisis times, for example. But honestly, nobody's focused on that. They're focused on the headline number, and that, thankfully, sentiment is the easiest to change. Fundamentals are very hard to change, but sentiment can change overnight. So, I think that's the rosier outlook that we have.